Hello everybody, my name is Jeevan Desarda. I'm a Senior Program Manager in Microsoft Identity Division. Last time in the developer onsite over here in Redmond, I couldn't join for a long time. But yeah, so even I couldn't deliver my own session because of some emergency. But yeah, I would really like to see you guys next time when you are here in the town. Moving on to the topic, today's topic is choosing the right federation protocol for your app. A lot of developers and architects and PMs even ask me this question, like how do I choose the right federation protocol in my app? How do I enable single sign-on? And we are going to look into all of that into this particular session. So today's agenda is covering why to implement federation. So it's like what is the need of implementing the federation? What are the different terminologies which comes along when we talk about the federation? As a developer, why you care about this when you are developing your new application? So if you are writing your own new application, or if you are already participating in some of the applications which are already developed, but still why you should care about this? What are the criteria and considerations you should do for selecting the right protocol, and understand the protocol, each protocol with pros and cons. So that way you can have a better decision when you're choosing the right protocol. So that's what I would like to cover. I also would like to have this particular session to be more vocal. So feel free to talk about or bring your questions over here in the forum, and we'll try to answer that. And that will be helpful for every one of us over here. So my first question over here, have you already implemented the federation in your product? If yes, then which protocol? Because I would really like to know. You can put your answer in the chat window, but the options are, the first option is yes, you have implemented with SAML, you have implemented with, the second option is OIDC and OAuth, or you have implemented with WS Federation, or you haven't implemented it, or you're planning to implement it. So I would really like to know what are the, thanks Marco for the quick answer over here. Anybody else, if you haven't implemented, you are planning to implement? Okay. And B, which is SAML and OIDC, but that's an interesting use case, which I really would like to understand, but good. Yeah, A and C. Okay, so yeah, SAML and WS Federation. Okay, thanks, Pinky. EVC, wow. So it's like all of three of them you might have implemented, OIDC, OAuth, and no. Okay. Okay, so all mixed set of answers, it seems like that. But good to know that most of you have touched the protocols, but let's see and talk, although you have implemented it, we will talk about the pros and cons and considerations, and at that time you can think twice, like, okay, does this really solve my problem, or does this, have I considered those particular things when I'm using it? You might not be the decision maker in the process. I can completely understand that, but definitely you as a developer have a very high particular vote which you can able to put forward to your leaders, saying that how can you influence that particular decision. Why to implement federation? It's like whenever we are doing this, why we are doing this is the first question comes. So but the basics, when you are talking about federation, is basically talking about single sign-on capabilities in your app. Security is the foremost, and the identity, securing that particular identity is the important task in every app. What are the application you write? There are also different types of applications you develop, might be just line of business applications for your organization, or you're developing an application for somebody or like your customer. Still, the identity handling is important. Security around that identity is important. The next thing is compliance. Nowadays, like there are a lot of compliance restrictions like GDPR and PCI, and those particular compliance. How do you compliant with your storage of and managing that particular identity in your system? So those two are the major drivers which we have seen across customers. But along with that, there are one more thing which we have realized, like now customers are more vocal. They know about single sign-on capability. They want to do a security. They want to improve their own security posture, and that's why these customers are pushing their developers and ISV saying that now you have to implement single sign-on. If I'm buying your product as a SaaS product, or if you're developing a product for me, you have to make sure that you are using my identity, which I have already secured it in a defined way. So I want to maintain my security posture, and that's why you have to implement single sign-on so that you can use my identity and don't create your own identity in your system. So along with that, it improves the user experience, because now no more username passwords. It's always good for users. They will be getting the complete single sign-on. Then there are other two particular benefits which we have seen, where most of the ISVs or SaaS products, you can list this as one of the feature, like single sign-on capability with different providers, and then you can put that in a higher SKU to get more revenue. So it's like a model. If you look at Slack or look at any other like DocuSign, if you want that particular single sign-on capability, you might have to go for a higher SKU in the product, and that's how they sell that particular feature. So it's one of the important feature in that list, which organization needs, and your enterprise, when they're buying the product, they definitely consider that. Now we are talking about terminology. We talk about like federation, but what the terminologies in the identity world are important. I've just listed a few of them. There are more, but the more relevant today is how do you say identity or identification? It's referring to a user in a unique or non-immutable way within an application. It can be just like user ID. Some people call it as username, but it's the way through which you identify the user in your system, and that's important, and that's how we call it as identification of a user or identity. Authentication is the way through which user is indeed identified in identification process. So it's like this is how you authenticate the user and make sure this is the identity which match in your system. The authorization is the way through which you allow them to do different things in your application. So it's more like an roles capability. So authorization provides a way like what that particular user can do in your system. And the provisioning is the process of creating and maintaining an application profile in your particular application with the specific data to that identity. So basically, provisioning an identity into your system with right set of attributes and deprovisioning or deleting or deactivating that particular user is called provisioning. We don't call direct deprovisioning, but provisioning comes with deprovisioning as also one of the important criteria. But that's how we look into the major aspects of identity, authentication, authorization, and provisioning. And all of these considerations have to be done whenever you are thinking about implementing federation, implementing single sign-on. Those things are important because you have to understand how I'm going to authenticate user, how the user is going to get authorization, how does that user get provision into my system. So all these things are much more related. That's why I just put those things over here. There are a lot of the other things which we'll also see in terms of terminology. But yeah, those are the basic considerations you have to do. Any questions still here? Good. Feel free to put that in the chat window, or you can also put that or say it over here on the forum, and we can discuss. Why developers should care? It's like if I'm a developer, why I should care about this? But if you look at 81% of data breaches involves weak or stolen credentials. So if you provide the way, you as a developer just provide a way for users to store username and passwords. In the normal world, when I'm talking about forms authentication, where you have your own system of authentication, you are storing username and passwords. But most of the time, the data breach happen because you cannot actually rely on user like what type of password he use. Think more about like this is summertime, so somebody says summer 2019, somebody will say spring 2019, or just say Seahawks 2019. So it's like, okay, this type of passwords are very easy to guess, and these get stored in your system. So it's like data breach. Most of the time, data breach involves because of the weak or those stolen credentials. And if I get like a credential in one system, I can definitely try on another system and try to get that, and that's how it works. Also, with the username and password, 73% of passwords are duplicated. That means if I talk to a user, even in your own world, think about individually, like how many times you repeat your password into different systems. At least you might repeat it 3 to 5 times. It is generic average. This is what we have seen. But that means there are 73% of users who always use similar password or same password in different systems. And so it's like if it's stolen on one system, it can be stolen on another system pretty easy. Today, if you want to secure all these username password, the 99% of these attacks, identity attacks, are blocked by multi-factor authentication. That means you have to enable second factor authentication, store their phone numbers or the way through which they are going to do the second factor, and then with those second factor authentication all the time, you can do this. But it's a heavy lifting work on the development side, and that's why we always suggest like, okay, if you want to go away with these type of problems, like I don't want to develop more on even two-factor authentication mechanism along with my username password, that's too much of work. Also, it's like everybody want a better security in their application. The best option in this particular case is just like, okay, implement the federation, implement the single sign-on, and move away from username and passwords. You don't care about the username passwords, but you rely more on tokens. And that's how this particular the security posture, you improve your security posture in this way and make it possible or enhance your application and secure your identities in your system. So, but that's how the statistics looks like, and that's where it's like it's important for every one of you to understand in the development phase itself, like, okay, I'm not going to write my authentication for username and password, I'm going to enable single sign-on. If you do it first at the right time, it will be quick, it will be easy, because that anyways, whatever the platform you choose for development, you have to look for authentication. And that's where and there are two possible ways over here. So you can either enable federation in your own product so that you can talk to any of the identity provider, or the other option is you as a SaaS app developer or application developer choose an authentication platform which can do for you. In Azure AD, it's a B2C system or business to consumers where you opt in for authentication and authorization platform, which provides you the capability to do all these particular things, which can do federation for you, which can store identities securely for you, which can give you compliance. All those particular things comes in picture. But those are the two options in every application you are developing. You can always decide like what I can do. Either I can go and choose the federation, implement federation, or I can choose the auth platform who provides me all these particular capability, and I don't have to worry on it. You just focus it on your business application development rather than focusing on authentication and authorization. Now, when we look at criteria and considerations for selecting the protocol, what particular think more about like what I should think now. It's okay, it's easy to make a decision now that I have to implement the federation. Suppose you have taken that decision, but what are the criteria and considerations you have to do when you are looking at different protocols? First and foremost is it should satisfy my business needs, because you are developing might be a web application or mobile application, and what are the federation protocol you're choosing has to fit either one or both of it, because you might be developing an application, there will be a web-based system and also a mobile application attached to it, or it might be just a web or just the mobile app, but it has to satisfy all the needs for that type of application. The second foremost particular consideration which you have to do is about customers, because whenever you are developing your application, it might be for your internal users, it might be for your customers or your partners or somebody who is going to use that particular system, but it has to work for all type of customers. So think more about your existing users who are using your system, might be your think more about it's for an example, we take here as a SaaS application. In that SaaS application, if I'm developing a web-based system, it has to work with my existing customers. The federation has to work with my existing customers who want to offer it. There will be new customers which will always come. So I have to look forward saying that, okay, I'm not going to do this for next might be 3 to 5 years. I'm not going to look into it again. So it has to work for all my new customers who I'm going to onboard for in next 3 to 5 years. And then there are some pre-sales customers where, okay, I'm already talking to a customer and this customer has this scenario and it has to solve that particular scenario. So basically all type of customers you have to look. It also has to fit in your current architecture. We are not saying that for authentication you change your complete architecture. It will be like 2x or 5x project. It should not land into that way. Otherwise, it's like you are rewriting your entire system. It should not happen like that. Whatever platform you are using today for development, whatever architecture might be, it's like entire application you are using, or you are using a single page application architecture or whatever it is. Or it's just the Java base particular or just API base you have written somewhere. But all of these particular scenarios, it has to fit into that particular architecture. It should be a small component into that architecture. It should not change your entire architecture. So when you're looking into your entire end-to-end system, think more about where I can fit the federation in my particular architecture. And it should not, I do not have to write too many components because of it, and that's how it should be. The next thing is easy to implement. It should not be it is not a rocket science, but I'll suggest okay, there are different ways to simplify it and shorten the dev cycle, because if you are looking at more bigger development cycle, it's always a problem to fit into the agile methodology or Scrum. It will span across multiple scrums, and then that's where it's you have to go through multiple cycles to it. And it has to be future proof. So whatever I'm designing or I'm developing, as I said, it has to be there in the market for next 5 years. Something it's if I write it today and it goes in next 2 years, or it completely changes in next 2 years, then that's another problem, because then I have to do that exercise again in next 2 years for entire thing, which makes similar investment again in next 1 or 2 years. It's very heavy. Nobody want to touch the auth platform because you want to focus on your business functionalities first. So that's why auth platform people don't consider it at highest priority. So always think more about whenever you are choosing it, it has to be the future proof. Okay. Now we are talking about different modern protocols, and what are those modern protocols? So modern protocols, when we talk about even SAML, we consider as a modern protocol, SAML 2.0. WS Federation is a very similar protocol which Microsoft developed in early those days, and it comes with the .NET framework, Windows Identity Foundations if you work with WIF, so it comes with WIF. And the newer one is in recent days is OIDC and OAuth 2.0. So basically, these are the three major protocols which you can, from where you have to choose what protocols you are going to use. Why we call it as modern? So if you talk about, you will hear this modern term in many of our documentations and many of the other places, but when we say modern, it's more it's over HTTPS, so which is more secure, HTTPS and TLS 1.2. So it's okay, it's a tokenized. So basically, it's going to give some sort of token. The token doesn't have a password. The token has just the user information and the few validations which you have to do it, and make sure that your particular the token which you are receiving in your system is correct and valid. And then you can get more user data from it. The best part of the implementing the federation is user credentials are never known to the app. So that means that you are not storing credentials for users. You are not actually validating the credentials for users. So you are completely relying on the token what you are receiving. We call it a semi-trusted system because basically you are building a trust between the identity provider and your application, which is a service provider in this particular case, and then you build a trust between those two systems, and everything works based out of that trust. And the setup happens mostly about the configuration. That means the configuration has to happen on the identity provider side, configuration has to happen on the application side, so application knows like, okay, whom I'm going to talk to, who is the identity provider behind the scene, and then you can able to set up those particular two systems so that they can build the trust and they can understand each other with the communication language. And here, protocol is more like a communication language, whether you use SAML or you use WS Federation or OIDC OAuth, but it's a communication language which actually both this particular system understands. Okay. Now, going back to the original point, understanding the protocol with pros and cons. And first, I would like to talk about SAML, and I would really want to spend some good amount of time over here on this particular slide, because SAML 2.0 has been there in the world like for almost 15 years now. It's a well-established protocol. It started with 1.0, 1.1, then evolved to 2.0, and the current version of the SAML protocol is 2.0. But it's been proven, being used by many of the leaders like SAP systems. If you look at Oracle, everybody supports SAML. So SAML is widely being used into the market by different, as I said, these particular bigger organizations. Along with that, there is a good amount of library support available, and that's why I think the adoption is high. It's been there for a long time, so it evolved over the period of time from 1.0 to 2.0, and that's where there's a good library support. If you look at the flow-wise in the diagram on the left, there is always like an identity provider, which is can be anything. Think more about Azure Active Directory or on-premise ADFS server or any other provider you take. And your application is a service provider. So there are two major entities over here we are talking about. One is your application, another is identity provider who holds the identity. So in the first flow, the user goes to your application and your application is being configured to talk to identity provider. So it knows like, okay, just take an example over here. It's more about your bar application, whatever you are developing. Okay, so if a user comes to your application, and if I'm a user, as I type my username at some Jeevan@microsoft.com, it understands that okay, you are a Microsoft.com user, you have your own instance of our application which is being configured to talk to Azure AD as identity provider. So it redirects the user to go and talk to the identity provider saying that this is your SAML request and I am making, as an application, I am making a request to your identity provider so that you validate this user. And that's how we call it as SAML request. So the request is getting generated by the service provider, redirecting the user to your identity provider for authentication. And in that third particular, the request SSO service, the request happens. The user actually validates or enters his credentials on the identity provider. So that's how you are not going to do authentication. The authentication will happen at the identity provider side. Identity provider will, Azure AD in this particular case, will do authentication and send the response back to your application and on the URL which you have been configured. The URL with which we talk about here is called Assertion Consumer Service URL or ACS URL. So the ACS URL is basically where the identity provider can post the token. The best practice what we have seen over here is you provide unique the ACS URL for every customer so that there will be an endpoint available for the customer so that it posts the token over there. Once the token is received, then the service provider or your application receives the token, understands the token, validates the token, and then redirect the user to the target resource. And then the target resource can be, here in this particular case, now you do authorization, because authentication once is complete by validating the token, the next thing comes is authorization. And you make sure that the user has the right set of level of access and then provide him those particular resources, whatever the user wants to access. And that's how the flow gets complete. But in simple word, this is very service provider initiated. There is another way called identity provider initiated, where the service provider is not generating a request and sending user to the Azure AD, but here Azure AD as identity provider directly respond back with the token on the assertion to consumer service URL. So the basic flow happens with the from the step number 4 over here, where the user logs into Azure Active Directory as identity provider over here, and then the Azure Active Directory as identity provider directly respond back to the application and say like, okay, this is your token, validate the token, and let the user log in. But that particular flow happens. So these are the two possible workflows. When you look at the SAML part of it, it's very simple and easy to implement because there are a ton of libraries available. Although behind the scene there is a lot of validation which we suggest that if you're implementing this, you should do. So I know some of you have already implemented. So think more about, have you done the correct validation of the token? And there are some important aspects in it, and I'm just going to I haven't put those over here in those bullets, but I'll talk about it. First is validating the audience. So that means whether this token is meant for me. Okay, so audience will always have the identifier or entity ID value for your application. So you have to validate this is audience is for me. Then the next thing is who sent this particular token. So you have to verify the entity ID of the identity provider, and in Azure world or Azure Active Directory, it's https://sts.windows.net/tenant-id/. So that's the pattern, but you should say it's like, okay, this token has came from this particular tenant, and is this the right? You have to match that with your configuration. The next important set of aspects are certificate, because the SAML is entirely based on trust. Whether it's a SAML or WS Federation, it's based on trust. So basically, you have to validate the X509 cert, which is attached with and there is a public key over there. So you have to retrieve the public key. You have to validate that the certificate is valid or not. You have to make sure that's the same certificate which is configured on the service provider or your application side. So it has to match. And then once the certificate matching happens, certificate is valid, the subject name, the CN is verified. After that, then look at the user information in the token. There are two particular important claims information, which is subject name identifier. So you should look into the name identifier value through which you can able to do a primary mapping of a user on your side. There are some applications which completely relies and they don't maintain even the user information, but what they do is they just process the token and creates a user profile in the cache automatically and basically use that particular user profile in the entire system. So that's the one way. The other way, most of the application, what they do is they just map the user information on their side, and that's where the subject name identifier, you can take that information from the token and make sure that the user maps in your system, and then you do it. But that's the way. Either you look at the name identifier claim or any other claim like email address or the principal name or user ID or whatever the way you want to customize the claim and send that, you can able to map the user, and that's how you should look at it. Another important aspect is how you should up to what time the token should be valid. In the SAML token, there is a property called not before and not after, and if I get a chance, I can show you the token, a sample token for you, and the sample token will show you like so that you can able to see. Okay, so I'm just opening sample token so that we can able to code. Okay, so this is the name identifier format, and you should always do a matching of the user based on this. The X509 certificate values, which is a public key over here, and that's the validation you should do. I was talking about the identity provider issuer, and this is the issuer value. So this is the one of the matching which you have to do. There is also an audience restriction. So this talks about your audience value. So you should validate that is this the token is meant for your application, because your application specific identifier value comes over here. So you should validate, yes, this is the application, the token is made for me. And then you should do a user mapping based on this name ID value or any other particular value which you need. Apart from that, as I said, there is a not before and not after, so two particular values, and Azure Active Directory does provide this particular token valid for one particular hour. So that means your session ideally should be only valid for 1 hour, and after that you should be able to request the new token again. But you should always create a session based on these particular conditions, and that's how it should be. And that's why I said it's simple and easy to implement, because if you are implementing with the library provides a way through which you can do these checks very easily. It works with almost all providers. So think more about if your customer has ADFS or 2.0, that just works with SAML or WS Federation. It's easy to implement with this, because then they'll definitely able to opt for it. When you think about OpenID OAuth protocol, you cannot force a customer to change their entire infrastructure of ADFS just because your application supports OpenID OAuth, and that's only supported in the newer version of ADFS, which is ADFS 4.0 or 5.0 now. So that's one of the con side of it. But the SAML works with most of the providers. You can easily able to do a claim customization, and you can say like, I need these particular claims in this fashion, and that's where customer can customize that and send that particular XML based token to you. But the very major drawback of SAML, it's a passive protocol. That means it needs a user interaction for doing single sign-on. That means somebody have to be interacting in your system. It's not suitable or designed for mobile application, because think more about on mobile application. If you're using SAML, it will open the browser. You have to type your username in that particular small window, and then you have to type the password to do the authentication. It will happen. The SSO can still work, but the experience will not be great. You cannot get offline access. So that means, consider if your API is going to go back and get the token and the user is not authenticated, there is no way you can able to get it. The reason is SAML is passive protocol, so it needs a user interaction. Somebody have to type your username and password. You can just pass username and password and get the token. It's not being designed for that. So getting an offline access with SAML token is not possible. Along with that, the 2FA or second factor with Authenticator app is really not possible, because it's the way you can only specify in the SAML auth context saying that I want this particular authentication to happen to identity provider, and then let identity provider decide that. So that's the way. But if you want to give an Outlook type of experience where my application logs in, and if I'm already logged in Outlook on my mobile, it should take the same token and authenticate the user. Oh no, it will not happen, because it will go through the browser. It will not directly go through the Authenticator app or those options. Today it's not possible to use Microsoft Graph with it, but we are coming up with that particular option. So this is coming soon, because we have found a way through which you can able to make this possible. Even with SAML token, you can able to invoke Microsoft Graph. And I think in some another session we'll discuss on how to do that. But it's something which we are going to come soon. And yeah, I think there are a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Why in Azure, why is SAML configured through the enterprise grade when OAuth and WS code are configured via app registration? It's a very valid question. So SAML and WS Federation, we suggest customers to go through the enterprise grade and configure that. OpenID OAuth is more like you have to register, and I'll talk about that, where you have to register the OAuth provider, your particular app with the OAuth provider. Microsoft is the OAuth provider, and that's why we give the name as app registration over there. But in the futures, you will able to see the merged experience, where we are combining the enterprise app and app registration together into one particular navigation option called app, because app is an app, doesn't matter. It's just based on the protocol. Right now we have defined or decided to put it in two particular navigation option, but we are planning to merge it together. So soon you will be able to see a merge experience over there, and we know we created this particular thing, and we are working on it to make sure that it's one experience for developers and for enterprise admins. Okay, so SAML, okay, there is one more question. In our case, we have two disparate AD domains, unless ones, and so we have to use ADFS and SAML claims because the B2B will not produce the same result. These accounts are not external guests, so it will be interesting to see if SAML claim does not work with Microsoft Graph. In the future, what will be the solution to allow multiple domains to authenticate into a single tenant? Today, multiple domains can authenticate into a single tenant. It's pretty much possible. You can have verified domains, and we have customers who have thousands of domains, verified domains, and then there are different types of users under that domain. But now you're saying we have to use ADFS and SAML claims because already B2B will not produce the same result. We know that the B2B today we consider them as a guest in the system, and these guest users have a different. But you're seeing these accounts are not external guests, but they are guests, so it will be interesting to see if SAML claim does not work with Microsoft Graph in the future. The SAML will work in the Microsoft Graph world. There is a little bit overhead on the developer side to make that happen, but that's something, as I said, like we will talk in the future. What will be the solution to allow multiple domains to authenticate into a single tenant? So yes, you can. As I said, if you have a verified domain in your particular tenant, you can create different users under that verified domain, and those particular users can authenticate into a single tenant. It's pretty much possible. If you're talking about B2B scenario, then the UPN for the B2B users is little different than what you have than your members or with your local users. So, but that's also something which we are coming up with a solution on that, where we will provide you saying that for members use UPN, for guests or for B2B users use email address as a claim, and then based on the user type, automatically while sending the token, we will do that juggling and we will send the right values to you. That's what we are working on, and I think within a month you should be able to see that feature. Right now we are testing that in a pre-production environment, but soon you should be able to see it. The SAML cons to FA with OAuth is not possible. We have been getting MFA prompts for MFA. What is this referring? Okay. So you're getting an MFA, as I said, it's not possible when I say it. It's the single sign-on streamlined experience is not possible. So think more about, on a mobile, I have opened my Outlook app and I'm looking at my emails, and now I go to switch to your application, and your app will prompt for authentication for me. In that way, because it's not using the our libraries or a container which can understand the user is already authenticated into a different app. Basically, it's a container broker-based single sign-on, which is not like directly available in that case, and you have to go through the username and password, and then it will ask for another multi-factor authentication. So that's where the experience, and when I say it's not possible, means the streamlined experience is not possible. It's possible to get 2FA and username and password, but it will happen all through browser. So user will be prompted with the browser. If user is using the managed browser, you might get single sign-on experience at that time. And then the second factor authentication depends on the configuration will happen, whether it's a phone call, it's SMS, text, or if it's like a Authenticator app, at that time the request will go there and then I have to come back. But all that thing. So, but finally you will be prompted through the browser. You will be taken through the browser scenarios. That's what I was doing. Okay. Now focusing on OIDC and OAuth. It's a newer protocol. As I say, the major difference between the OIDC and OAuth, if you look at the diagram over here, there is a token endpoint, where your application is providing a auth code, client ID and credentials over here in this particular case, and you will be getting return in access token and a refresh token. So here that means it's offline access is possible because of this particular scenario versus SAML, because here is once the session is started, you have your access code or access token, and you can go with that and go with the auth code to the Azure AD token endpoint and get your particular refresh token and access token. And here you can use the refresh token to get the new access token, and that's how you can continue your refresh token and access token validity for as long as you need it. It might be up to 60 days. You can go with that. Like just invoke a refresh token, get the new access token, which is valid for might be for 8 hours. Again, when the access token is invalid, send the refresh token. With the refresh token, get the access token. But behind the scene, you can able to do this dance through your application, and the user will get like a streamlined single sign-on experience. It's more suitable for mobile applications with this particular, and as I explained, the offline access is possible through the Azure AD token endpoint. It works great with conditional access or second factor authentication. If you use our libraries, then the library support is still, it's coming in all. You might see all our libraries. Some of libraries are in preview. Some of the libraries are still getting developed in Java and all that. But the library support is moderate. But if you use our libraries, we will make sure that our libraries cache the token. You invoke the token in a right way. The kind of development involved into this is very small. It supports major providers like Microsoft, Google, and Facebook. We have given the supported library list saying that these are the libraries which we support, and you can use any of these open source libraries also, and it should work with Microsoft already. So based on that, and you can use Microsoft Graph because you'll get a better token over here. You need to send a better token in invoking the REST-based Graph APIs. The token format is JSON based, and then you can able to look into that JSON and retrieve the user properties. When I say con, it might not work for all customers. I think I explained the case of ADFS. I've seen this with some developers and customers saying that I have an ADFS 2.0. I have no immediate plan to upgrade. But if your application supports only OpenID OAuth, then it will not work with my ADFS infrastructure. But if they are using Azure AD and ADFS in federation, then it will still work. But Microsoft, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, all these are different providers that support OIDC OAuth. I've also heard like some of our competitors like OneLogin, Okta, they ask for higher SKU, like they want to use OpenID OAuth. So that might be a consideration which you need to think about when you're developing an application for all your customers. And claim customization is not very easy in general in this particular case, as it's very easy in the SAML token. So think more about if I want to use employee ID and attribute, it's easy to add in SAML. We do provide a way through which you can do a claim customization. In OpenID OAuth, our recommendation is you should be actually using Microsoft Graph, which is our REST-based APIs, and then invoke the API and get the information. But in that particular case, it will be two thoughts. Like one is to retrieve the token, validate the token, and the next is then invoke all the APIs as you need to get the rest of the user information. In the SAML, you will get that inside the token because you can customize the token. You can get one or two properties as you need it, and you can use it. But that's like a con side of it. Okay. Is the OIDC token returned to a browser or to a web app? It's both ways possible. OIDC token there are different flows possible. You consider if you're developing a single page application through a browser, we can return the token in the header. So that's through the browser you can able to get it. If you want that through the API, or if you're developing a daemon application or native application, even you can do that and you can able to get your token back onto your native app. So that's pretty much possible. So OpenID OAuth does support all those particular possible flows as you need. And we have explained that just look for authentication scenarios in Azure AD, and you can able to find an article on that which explains different scenarios, auth scenarios, which you are developing, whether it's a single page app, it's a native app, server app, daemon app, or depends on type of app. There are different types of flows there, and you should able to use that and get the token back. It can be written in the browser or in the web app as you need, or even in your APIs. That's how the difference between OIDC OAuth and SAML. But it's up to you in which particular case. If I'm in short or in summary, if I want to say, if you are developing a web app and mobile app, you should be using OpenID Connect OAuth. If you are developing an application which is just a web app and then there is no mobile app, or in the future you can use SAML if you need, or if you're developing an application for all your set of customers and your customer has some ADFS, which is like 2012 or 2008, I think ADFS 2.0 Windows Server, then the SAML is only going to work because it doesn't support OpenID OAuth in that particular thing. So those are the important considerations you need to think, and then choose the protocol. But that's how I meant. I think if you still have further questions, I'm happy to answer. Alexei, I think I have given you the answers. Yeah, that's it. So thanks for providing your time over here. Give you one more minute. If you have questions, feel free to type the questions over there, and then I'm happy to answer those. Yeah, and please take the survey, ak.ms ID Office Hour survey. That's the quick short link. Put that, and you can able to get that. Does Microsoft provide a flowchart showing which protocol to use? Yes. We do have a flowchart. I don't have the document link, but I'll pass that document link to Stephen, and Stephen will post that in the YAML forum. Right?
Yeah, we can tweet it out as well.
Okay. Yeah, we can tweet out that too, and we can provide you that, right? But we do have a document which explains the workflow, in what case you should choose SAML, and in what case you should choose OpenID OAuth. So there is a workflow diagram given in the public document. I'll provide you that document. Please ping me afterwards also. I can definitely give you that. Great. Thank you. Thanks for your time, and it's been great session. Great questions. Thanks for all your support here.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. So remember, August 25th will be the next call. Thank you.